This is Spyanswer. It's not Jeopardy. The concept for this project is I wanted to make a game that's like Jeopardy. And that's what I did. So let's take a look. This is the entirety of the code for the Spyanswer game. There's a lot of it. We're not going to go through all of it. We'll go through some more interesting bits later. But for now, let's just kind of play the game so you get an idea of what it's all about. You get your fancy menu screen. Select one for an option. Player 1 buzzes in with A. We'll enter player 1's name. Player 1 is me, Adam. Player 2 buzzes in with B. That's not me, so we're going to name him not Adam. And player 3 buzzes in with L. That's definitely not me. So all these categories and their questions and their answers are defined in a JSON file, kind of like this. I'll explain more about it later, but for now, oh, look at that. Okay, I'll select 1 for 200. Read the question, 3, 2, 1, buzz in. I get to answer first. So I got the question right. I get the points. Let's select another category. So I'll select 2 for 200. So now player 3 really knows what that is. And then they forgot. And then nobody else can get the answer because they forgot. And it just moves on. And that's kind of how the game goes. So you can win points, you can lose points, you can just skip questions if nobody knows them. Type in end to end the round prematurely. But yeah, you see a little screen that displays the final scores, highlights the winner. Back to the menu. So now that we've had, a good look of how this game goes, I'd just like to highlight some cool things with the code. The first one of these things is these 4 variables that are kept as global. These first 2 are font properties for what's displayed on the game. These 2 specific fonts are used basically everywhere in the game, and it made more sense to keep them as global variables rather than type them out a million times, so they're there. This last variable over here is a numpy array, and in an earlier iteration of the program, it was in the graphics function, which is responsible for drawing this whole thing. The problem is this gets drawn over and over again over the course of a game, and there's not really a need to be recreating these over and over again over the course of the program, so it's just constant. Next up, I'd like to touch on a little bit of handling different cases for user input. When you're selecting a category, for example, usually it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which are all integers. If you input a string, however, it doesn't really know how to handle that as an integer. That's where try and accept come in. So it tries to convert the cat variable, which is your input for the category, to an integer. If it can't do that, it'll spit out a value error. If this error variable is set to true earlier on, like at the beginning of the while loop, it's set to false. If it encounters a value error, it's set to true. If error is true, it'll run this function, which just prints a line of text that says, oh, there's an error, oopsie, and then just skip everything else in the loop and go back to the top. Set error back to false, and ask you to select a new category. Same sort of thing with wager, except there's a few more cases. For example, if you select a tile that's already been selected, the trick is internally, that tile now has a value of 0. So it checks and it sees, oh, that value is 0. That means it's already been selected. So I'm just going to run this errors again. Just quickly run a touchback on this point. When it sets the value of the tile to 0, and it's actually used somewhere else. This while loop checks to make sure the sum of all of these cells is not equal to 0. If it's equal to 0, every single tile has been selected. So the while loop ends, prints that all questions are selected, and either moves on to the next round or ends the game. The last little bit of code I'd like to touch on is loading questions from a JSON file. I chose JSON because the neat thing about the JSON library in Python is that when you open a file and you load it as JSON, store it as a variable, that variable is just a dictionary, which is actually quite convenient for getting all the things you need out. So there's a little bit of error handling in this one. First of all, it's going to try to take the file it opened and load it as a JSON file. Problem is, JSON has a specific syntax. If the file's syntax isn't right, it's going to return an exception. We catch that exception, set this error variable to true, and if the error is true, return errors 3, which is another error message, and we return 0, 0, 0. We'll get to that later. In a similar fashion, there is a key entry in the JSON file, Trebek, and the program checks for that key, and if it's not there, again, error is 3, return 0, 0, 0. If the length of the categories list is not equal to 6, if the length of the questions list is not equal to 6, or if the number of questions for a specific category is not equal to 5, again, error is 3, return 0, 0, 0. Now, what does this actually do? Well, usually you would be returning categories, answers, and questions. And because this load questions function is called here, it should return categories, answers, functions. The very first thing it checks for, if categories is equal to 0, it ends the function prematurely, because if you don't have a valid JSON file, you can't play the game. And yeah, that's all I got for the game. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.